I want to very briefly talk about this really lovely poem, Shancoduff. Again, it goes back to a number of things I've already said about Kavanagh. It's a very personal poem. It's a narrative, and it's deeply reflective. But for me, containing some really quite startling honesty. For me, it's the imagery and the symbolism in this poem that gets me. And I want to show you something really, really quickly. So this is kind of one of those poems, you know the way in Advent he talks about like the spirit shocking wonder of a black slanting Ulster hill, and he talks about how in the Canal song it's the importance of, there's nothing whatever is by love debarred, that there's beauty in everything. This is one of those poems where he's talking about like a place that, he left this place because he was looking for intellectual stimulation and engagement, but it's home, and therefore it's a place that matters to him. Shancoduff's a place in Monaghan where he was from, and in this poem he describes the place in kind of affectionate detail. Let me just show you. I'm not going to spend long on this at all. It's literally 2 minutes, I hope, but I want to show you just a couple of things that I love about Kavanagh in this poem. My black hills have never seen the sun rising. Eternally they look north towards Armagh. Lot's wife would not be salt if she had been incurious as my black hills are that are happy when dawn whitens Glasdrummun Chapel. Now, I just want to mark, see this here, the reference to Lot's wife. And it ties back to something I mentioned in a previous video about Inniskeen Road July evening. Kavanagh's poetry is often populated or typified by the use of allusions. So there's an element of reading a Kavanagh poem, you become a more educated person. And that's a biblical allusion. In the first book of the Bible, Genesis, there's the story of Lot. And it's the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And in that story, his wife, Lot's wife, turns back and against the express instructions of God, and she gets turned into a pillar of salt. That's the allusion. But essentially what he's saying in this poem is that there's nothing special about this place. There's nothing that you turn your head back to look at. He knows it's a kind of an ordinary place. But just the reference to Lot's wife and that allusion, it enriches the imagery. It adds a substance, a complexity to the poem, which I like. I think poetry should have that. It shouldn't be superficial. It should have depth. You should be able to dig your fork down into it and find something else in there, The second stanza, by the way, when he says they've never seen the sun rising, he's talking about the fact that the sun rises in the east and the hills face west. So they're kind of dark. The fact that he mentions that they look north towards Armagh, the fact that he mentions Glasdrummun Chapel, this just shows his familiarity with the place. Don't forget, place is centrally important in Kavanagh's poetry. So we have the Advent darkened room. We have the village where there's a churning going on and the boys are lurching in Advent. We have the canal, Grand Canal. We have the hospital. We have the Rialto Bridge. We have the Parnassian Islands. We have Raglan Road and Grafton Street. We have Inniskeen Road. So, places are significant in Kavanagh's poetry. There's like a motif, a repeated reference to place and the importance of place. But anyway, the second stanza is lovely and just has my favourite line in this poem. And then the third stanza is the one that I find most interesting. So he describes this place, and what he's saying is, I recognise that there's nothing really special about this place. My hills hoard the bright shillings of March, while the sun searches in every pocket. They are my Alps, and I have climbed the Matterhorn with a sheaf of hay for 3 Persian calves, in a field under the big fort at Rock Savage. And again, there's all those little details I said in the previous video earlier on today when I recorded it about Inniskeen Road. Those, like, good personal writing contains those little details, those personal observations that make it sing, make it pick up, make it real, give it muscle, give it verve, give it energy, make it, immersive. So he knows this place well. There's this little story of him, going up into the hills in a freezing cold day, to rescue these calves who are perishing, freezing cold and shivering. And he mentions the big fort, which is like an outcrop, and Rock Savage is a place. So, you believe him that he's being there. But what I love is him saying that the hills are my Alps and I have climbed the Matterhorn, because, of course, that's a really good example of hyperbole. which is deliberate exaggeration used for, exaggeration used for deliberate effect. And it reminds me very much of him saying that the water over the Lochgate Niagarously roars in the Canal Bank sonnets, and the reference to the Parnassian Islands in the same poems, or even the reference to the Rialto Bridge in the hospital. The Matterhorn is this amazing, feature of the natural world. It's astonishing. If you ever bought a Toblerone, you'll know the outline of the Matterhorn. It's this astonishing feature in Switzerland, this magnificent mountain. And obviously the drumlins of glacial deposition in Monaghan and that part of the world are not like the Matterhorn, the Alps at all. But what he's saying is there's beauty in them the way there is in the Alps. And there's even more beauty because that's where he's from. There's an identity there. And it is true that where you grow up retains a singular important quality to you. You might not know that now when you're young, but certainly that becomes important. And what he's saying, deliberately using hyperbole, is that this place is beautiful to me. And it ties in with his later, obsession is the wrong word, but his later determination to find and see the beauty in the world all around us that we saw in the Canal Sonnets. The last part is very interesting, and it just brings up that lovely honesty that you find in Kavanagh's poetry. And sometimes, I know when I did On Raglan Road with some of you, there was a lot of you quite shocked by his quite bitter language that he used towards the subject of his unrequited love in that poem, and his, I suppose, close to arrogance at the end of that poem. But look, honesty is compelling in writing. You see it in On Raglan Road. You see it in him saying how miserable he is in the beginning of Advent. You see him in his his desire to almost grasp life, having come so close to losing it in the hospital. You see it in his loneliness being depicted with the allusion to Alexander Selkirk and being on the other side of the half-talk code of mysteries in Inniskeen Road, July evening. But you see it here too. And I'll explain it really quick and then I'll finish this because I'm sure you don't watch it anyway. The sleety winds fondle the rushy beards of Shancoduff, so it's a cold place. It's not a wonderfully tropical place, but he celebrates the place for what it is. Rushy beards is referring to the vegetation that grows there. When the cattle drovers settling in the featherner bush, this is a place where these drovers, people who move cattle around to bring them to marts, and they were taking a rest in this little sheltered place, look up and say, who owned them hungry hills that the water hen and the snipe must have forsaken? A poet? Then by heavens he must be poor. And the line I love is, I hear and is my heart not badly shaken. I love that line so much. I think it's brilliant. There's a mistake there, I'll fix it. And what he's saying is, he's asking the question, and it's a brilliant question. Have you ever asked yourself that question? He's questioning the fact that he loves this place. He's questioning the fact that he values this place. And when he hears outsiders saying, who owns this place? God, this place a kip. You must be really poor if this is all you can own. He goes, is this place worthless? And the question shows insecurity, and it shows how, for me, honest Kavanagh is in his poems. How he'll admit that insecurity. And again, for me, it shows how Kavanagh's poetry has this wonderful ability to be intimate and personal, and yet so easy to relate to. Because I felt that many, many, many times. The things that I think are important. Am I a fool? The fear of being mocked. The social death of being wrong about something. I think most people can relate to that on some level. The fact is that very few of us include it in material that we publish to the world. So it's a lovely poem. It's personal. It's, again, rooted in place. Very accessible conversational language, yet beautifully structured marked by striking nature imagery and allusions which add a depth and a richness, and always, always, always honest. So there you go. Okay, I hope you found that useful.